The Last Kingdom tells the story of Uhtred, named after his father, the Saxon lord of Bebbanburg. When the Danish Earl Ragnar and his Viking army invade Northumbria, Lord Uhtred leads the charge on the battlefield but loses, dying alongside his army. The young Uhtred and a Saxon girl named Brida are then taken as slaves by Ragnar. Ragnar takes a liking to the kids, and when Uhtred saves Ragnar's daughter Thera from an assault at the hands of a young Viking named Sven, Ragnar blinds Sven in one eye, banishes his father Kjartan, and adopts Uhtred and Brida as his own children. They are raised as Danes and pagans and fully assimilate to the Viking lifestyle. Years later, Uhtred and Brida, now in a relationship, witness Sven and Kjartan burning down Ragnar's great hall, killing the Earl and his family, but sparing Thera to take as a slave. Uhtred wants to avenge his adopted father and makes plans to return home to Bebbanburg to claim his rightful lordship and command his army against Sven and Kjartan. Unfortunately, his uncle Elfric has taken over as lord and has no plans of giving up his title. Also complicating things for Uhtred and Brida is the fact that Viking warlords Ubba and Guthrum believe that Uhtred was responsible for Ragnar's death, making Uhtred an outsider to both his birth home with the Saxons and his adopted home with the Danes. Uhtred and Brida flee to Wessex, the last remaining Saxon kingdom, with the hopes of finding solace there. They alert King Ethelred and his brother Lord Alfred of an impending attack by the Danes. Due to Uhtred's warning, the Saxons win the battle, although King Ethelred is killed, leaving the crown to Alfred, enraging Ethelred's son Ethelwald. Uhtred pledges his loyalty to Alfred for 1 year in exchange for Alfred's future assistance in Uhtred's quest for revenge. Earl Ragnar's son, Ragnar the Younger, returns from his own exploits in Ireland to investigate his father's murder. He believes his adopted brother Uhtred, but doesn't want to wait to enact his vengeance. And so Ragnar and Brida part ways with Uhtred. As Uhtred trains the Saxon army to better fight the Danes, he also is persuaded by Alfred to take a Saxon wife, Mildred. Mildred births Uhtred a son, but when the baby dies, Uhtred and Mildred separate. Meanwhile, Ragnar has joined the other Viking warlords in their attacks against the Saxons and has entered into a relationship with Brida. Uhtred and Ada, Alfred's most trusted general, lead many defenses against the invading Vikings. One battle sees Uhtred killing Ubba. In the season 1 finale, King Alfred gives a rousing speech to his troops and Uhtred leads the army into battle, using Viking strategies to fight the Danes. They come out victorious and Ragnar and Brida are captured as hostages to secure a new peace with the Danes, while Guthrum converts to Christianity after seeing the Saxon victory as proof of God. In season 2 of The Last Kingdom, Uhtred is sent on a mission to rescue a Christian Dane named Uhtred from his Danish captors. Being both a Christian and a Dane, the hope is that Uhtred can unite Northumbria against the pagan invaders. Uhtred rescues Uhtred, who is then crowned king. Uhtred falls in love with Uthred's sister Gisela, but Uhtred proves himself to be an ineffective ruler, failing to reach a peace deal with the Danish brothers Siegfried and Eric, who also lay claim to the north. And to top it all off, Uhtred is convinced by the mischievous abbot Uhtred that Uhtred threatened his power, so Uhtred has Uhtred sold into slavery. Ragnar arrives to rescue Uhtred, and former nun-turned-warrior Hild helps to nurse Uhtred back to health. Upon learning that Uhtred had promised his sister Gisela to Uhtred's villainous uncle Elfric, Uhtred crashes the wedding, saves Gisela, and kills the evil abbot Uhtred. Upon learning that Uhtred killed a man of the church, King Alfred forces Uhtred to once again swear fealty or Ragnar would suffer the consequences. Uhtred and Ragnar then set their sights on avenging their father's death and rescuing their sister. With Brida and their allies at their side, the group storms Sven and Kjartan's home, killing the father and son and rescuing Thera. Father Beaka, a longtime loyal friend to Uhtred's Saxon family, nurses Thera back to health and the two fall in love and marry. 3 years pass and Uhtred and Gisela have settled down and had kids. But that's all disrupted when Uhtred is asked by Siegfried and Eric to join their revolt against King Alfred. Alfred, meanwhile, has married his daughter Ethelfled to the abusive Ethelred, Lord of Mercia. When Siegfried and Eric capture Ethelfled and hold her for ransom at their fort, Alfred is forced to choose between saving his daughter and saving his kingdom. Alfred decides to pay the ransom and save his daughter, an act his trusted general Ada strongly disagrees with. While in captivity, Ethelfled falls in love with Eric and the two plan to run away together. Siegfried discovers Eric and Ethelfled's relationship and sees it as a betrayal. Ada disobeys Alfred's orders and leads a charge against the fort as Uhtred infiltrates it to aid in Ethelfled and Eric's escape. During that escape, a bitter Siegfried kills Eric and Ethelfled kills Siegfried for revenge. Uhtred, Ada, and the Saxon army defeat the Danes at the fort, burning it to the ground, and Ethelfled is returned to her abusive husband Ethelred. Ada is killed for disobeying his king, and Alfred releases Uhtred from his oath. In Season 3 of The Last Kingdom, King Alfred begins to fall gravely ill. He demands Uhtred swear an oath of loyalty to his son and heir Edward, but Uhtred refuses. When Uhtred's wife Gisela dies in childbirth, Uhtred burns her body on a pagan pyre, something the monk Brother Godwin sees as a desecration against his Christian faith. When Uhtred accidentally kills the monk, he is forced to flee as Alfred banishes him from the kingdom. And that kingdom was in a very precarious situation as enemies surrounded on all sides. Alfred's bitter and villainous nephew Ethelwald wanted the throne for himself and rallies the Danish armies to join him in battle. Following his banishment, Uhtred joins Brida, Ragnar, and Ragnar's cousin Canute, along with the Danish army, in their effort to invade Wessex. Along the way, Uhtred encounters the witch Skade, who places a curse on him. Meanwhile, Alfred calls upon his son-in-law Ethelred, Lord of Mercia, to send troops to combat the Danish invaders, but Ethelred refuses. Instead, Ethelfled is forced to rally the troops herself and lead them into battle. This results in the people of Mercia rallying around Ethelfled as a leader. In retaliation, Ethelred tries to have his wife killed. Ethelfled sends for Uhtred's help and he ditches his Danish allies to come to her aid. Although Ethelfled and Uhtred have developed romantic feelings for each other, Uhtred doesn't act on them, fearing the curse that has been placed on him by Skade. And to lift that curse, Uhtred finds Skade and drowns her, allowing him to be with Ethelfled. Meanwhile, Ethelwald conspires with Canute to have Ragnar killed. After Ethelwald kills Ragnar, Canute is placed in charge of the Danish army. Canute also begins a relationship with Brida, who is unaware that her new lover was responsible for Ragnar's death. As Ethelwald and his Danish allies prepare for battle, he also stoked the fires of civil unrest in Wessex, pushing the people toward intolerance and bigotry. Thera, who converted to Christianity when marrying Beocca, is killed due to her Danish heritage. As Alfred's health continues to decline, he continues teaching his son Edward how to be a king. Edward marries a common woman who bears him twins, but Alfred's wife Elswith has them taken away so Edward can marry a more suitable match. Elfled, daughter of Lord Ethelhelm. Before his death, Alfred pardons Uhtred, an act Elswith tries to reverse by once again imprisoning him. Edward goes against his mother's wishes, fully pardoning Uhtred and inviting him to fight by his side. Uhtred agrees to join Edward's army, not under oath, but as a free man. During the battle between the Saxon and Danish armies, Uhtred finds and kills Ethelwald on the battlefield, allowing his brother Ragnar to pass into Valhalla. Edward's army defeats the Viking invaders, living to fight another day. In Season 4 of The Last Kingdom, Uhtred finally moves forward with his plans to take out his villainous uncle Elfric and reclaim his rightful home of Bebbanburg. He attacks with a small group, including his friend Beocca and son young Uhtred. But it turns out Uhtred's just a little too late, as Elfric's son Witgar has also arrived to take control for himself. Witgar kills his father and the men of Bebbanburg pledge their loyalty to him. They then turn their focus on Uhtred and his men. Beocca sacrifices himself to save young Uhtred as the others flee from Bebbanburg. Young Uhtred, who resents his father's violent pagan ways, decides to become a cleric of the Christian church. Uhtred disavows his son, taking back his name. And so young Uhtred becomes Bishop Oswald. Meanwhile, Ethelred conspires with his army commander Eardwulf on how to heighten the power of Mercia to equal that of Wessex. Eardwulf's family name had been tarnished, but Ethelred promised to restore it to its former glory if Eardwulf helps him conquer all of East Anglia. As they begin fighting to reclaim Viking land in East Anglia, Canute, Brida, and their army take the opportunity to invade Mercia. Edward is persuaded by his shady new advisor and father-in-law Ethelhelm to hold back on sending forces, as a defeat in Mercia could rid them of the nuisance that Ethelred had become. Edward's mother Elswith has different thoughts on the matter, wanting to not only protect her daughter Ethelfled, but ensure that Edward would still retain the loyalty of the Mercian people. And so Elswith goes behind Edward's back to ask the Welsh king Hywel for his assistance. Meanwhile, Uhtred rushes to be by Ethelfled's side, and along the way he encounters the Viking Haston, who was looking after Canute's sons. Haston reveals to Uhtred Canute's involvement in Ragnar's death. Uhtred kidnaps Canute's sons and joins Ethelfled in the Mercian village Tettenhall. As the Danes attack, the Mercian and Welsh armies defend their land. Soon Ethelred arrives with his army, as does Edward with the Wessex army. With the combined Christian forces, the Danish army is finally defeated. During the battle, Uhtred and Canute fight, and a pregnant Brida learns of Canute's involvement in Ragnar's death. So she takes revenge, killing Canute, the father of her unborn child. As the battle dies down, Brida asks Uhtred to kill her and send her to Valhalla. But Uhtred refuses and Brida is captured by the Welsh and made a slave. During the battle, Ethelred is mortally wounded. On his deathbed, he must help find a suitable husband for his and Ethelfled's daughter Elfwin to ensure their succession of the crown. Eardwulf befriends Edward, who then proposes Eardwulf would make a perfect match. When Ethelred rejects this idea, Eardwulf kills him. Ethelfled also rejects this proposal, so Edward has her imprisoned until after the wedding. Uhtred flees with Elfwin and discovers that Eardwulf had murdered Ethelred. When Uhtred tells Edward this revelation, the king realizes the errors of his ways and dismisses the treacherous Ethelhelm as his advisor. Edward recognizes the loyalty and respect Uhtred has over the Mercians and decides to appoint him Lord and Protector of Mercia until a suitable match can be found for Elfwin. Uhtred's first act on the throne is to immediately relinquish the power to Ethelfled. Ethelfled is made Queen of Mercia until Elfwin marries and takes a vow of chastity to ensure the succession passes to her daughter. This move at first infuriates Edward, but he realizes he needed to stay aligned with his sister and Mercia to keep their kingdom under Saxon control. Meanwhile, the Viking warlord Sigtryggr raids the Welsh settlements and frees Brida. As they continue to decimate the Welsh army, they come across and capture Eardwulf, who was in hiding following his murder of Ethelred. Eardwulf tells them that Edward had left Winchester undefended, so the Viking army turned their attention there. The Danes take control of Winchester and imprison many of its inhabitants, including Elswith, Ethelhelm, Elfled, Edward's children, and Uhtred's daughter Stiora. When Eardwulf assaults Stiora, Sigtryggr has him killed. Uhtred leads a negotiation with Sigtryggr to come to a truce. Sigtryggr is given the Northumbrian capital of Joferwick in exchange for his surrender of Winchester. Sigtryggr also takes a willing Stiora as his captive to ensure the truce's legitimacy. As the truce between the Saxons and Danes is established and the season comes to a close, Brida vows to be Uhtred's undoing. Ethelhelm poisons Elswith, and Edward entrusts his son Ethelstan into Uhtred's care. In Season 5 of The Last Kingdom, several years have passed and Uhtred now rules Rumkofa, while still serving as a vital ally of Mercia. Uhtred is also raising and training Edward's son Athelstan into becoming a formidable warrior. Meanwhile, Brida has become the leader of a fanatical band of Danish warriors. One of her new loyal followers is Ronvaldr, the long-lost violent brother of Sigtryggr. Brida's army captures and castrates young Uhtred before sending him back to his father as a sign of aggression. Ronvaldr then leads an army to invade Joferwick, forcing Sigtryggr and his new wife Stiora to flee. Upon seeing her people slaughtered, Stiora reveals herself to engage Brida in a trial by combat. Upon hearing of Joferwick's invasion, Uhtred leads an army to fight off Brida's Danish forces. Along the way, he is joined by Sigtryggr, who helps win back the city. In the battle, Brida's young daughter Vibeke is killed, and Brida is forced to order her troops to retreat. Seeing his army has lost, Ronvaldr attempts to defect back to his brother's side. To earn forgiveness, Ronvaldr subjects himself to a trial of the gods, which he passes. A defeated Brida remains determined to kill Uhtred, leading to a final confrontation between the former lovers and childhood friends. Uhtred defeats Brida, but convinces her to move on and start a new life. Unfortunately, just as Brida relents, Stiora arrives and kills her. Following the victory in Joferwick, Uhtred is called back to Aylesbury, where Queen Ethelfled is dying of cancer. She names her daughter Elfwin as her successor, before dying in Uhtred's arms. Despite Ethelfled's line of succession being known, the transfer of power is quickly complicated. The villainous Ethelhelm plots to have his grandson Elfward named King of Mercia and Wessex, but it's actually Edward who steals the crown for himself. Elswith flees with Elfwin, wanting to protect her granddaughter from Edward's power-hungry schemes. Meanwhile, Ethelhelm continues his own schemes, trying to stoke a war between the Saxons and Danes, in the hopes it would weaken both sides and create another opportunity to sit his grandson Elfward on the throne. Due to this plot, Ethelhelm accidentally has his own daughter, Edward's wife Elfled, killed. Despite uncovering Ethelhelm's villainous machinations, Uhtred is too late to stop the war between the Saxons and Danes. The Danish army is ultimately defeated, with Sigtryggr being taken prisoner. Edward agrees to free Sigtryggr if the warrior agrees to be baptized and swear fealty, but the pagan warrior refuses. and so Uhtred is forced to execute his son-in-law Sigtryggr. Elsewhere, Ethelhelm strikes up an alliance with King Constantine of Scotia. The alliance would see the Scottish army assisting in an uprising against Edward to install Elfward on the throne. In exchange, Ethelhelm offers a captured Elfwin to marry Constantine, and agrees that the Saxons would not encroach on the Scotia lands in the north. The duo, alongside a captive Elfwin, make camp in Bebbanburg as guests of Uhtred's cousin Witgar. Although Uhtred wishes to avoid battle and retreat to his family, the uprising taking its start in his original home of Bebbanburg moves Uhtred to believe God's plan is for him to fight, and so Uhtred rallies the armies of Wessex and Mercia to quell the uprising. Despite Edward's resistance to Uhtred's battle plans and threatening execution to anyone who wouldn't stand down, Uhtred's allies ignore the king and prepare for battle. Resigned to the inevitable war, Edward relents and joins Uhtred's side. Uhtred and Edward lead their army to Bebbanburg for a final battle against Ethelhelm and Constantine. Joining the fight is Uhtred's daughter Stiora and her Danish army. In Bebbanburg, the young Ethelstan confronts the villainous Ethelhelm, admonishing him for all of the horrible acts he has committed in an effort to put Elfward on the throne. A disgusted Elfward abandons his grandfather, leaving him to die. Meanwhile, Uhtred finally faces his cousin Witgar in battle, killing him once and for all. As the battle ends, Edward comes out victorious. The king names Uhtred the Lord of Northumbria, but Uhtred then reveals that he has secretly struck a deal with Constantine to rule Northumbria as a region independent from England. Edward is furious by this revelation, but Uhtred agrees to keep Northumbria an ally of Wessex, and promises that one day a king will come who will unite all of the kingdoms under one rule. And so, as the series comes to a close, Uhtred, the new Lord of Bebbanburg, is finally at peace in his family home.